It's quite a long-running and bit of a complicated issue, but effectively Puma Energy is the largest supplier of fuel in Papua New Guinea and indeed the only supplier of aviation fuel to the country. So if there's any issues with Puma Energy, it's likely to have some very serious ramification for fuel supply in the country. At the heart of this issue is basically a disagreement between the country's central bank, Bank of Papua New Guinea or BPNG, and Puma Energy, and the amount of foreign exchange, the amount of foreign currency that the company needs to import crude oil. Now, that has been escalating for quite some time, and we do know that some allegations that the central bank has raised will be raised to the government as part of this 30-day national emergency, and they'll examine those allegations that the central bank is raising against Puma Energy. Now, for Puma Energy, in its part, it says that the foreign exchange or the currency needs that it requires aren't being met, and so then it's been unable to import the level of crude oil that it needs to be refined to supply the country's energy needs. Now, on top of that, also what we've seen is Bank South Pacific, Papua New Guinea's largest bank. They've independently written to Puma Energy intending to close its accounts. Now, in a statement, Bank South Pacific says that it's doing so under its obligation to strictly comply with all regulatory requirements. So Puma not being able to bank in Papua New Guinea would, of course, be quite disastrous for the country, something that would lead to, of course, it not being able to operate its business and likely lead to very serious fuel shortages, both at the Bowser and as well for aviation fuel supply.
Yeah, and of course the issue of foreign currency in Papua New Guinea, particularly for businesses, has always been a problem.
It really has for effectively a decade now, and ultimately that comes down to, I guess, the economic mismatch between when there's foreign currency supply and when there's foreign currency demand. But as it's understood, this issue effectively came out from the central bank having a look at its major foreign currency suppliers. Now, Puma Energy in March last year wrote to the central bank saying that it didn't have enough foreign currency to be supplying the market as it said that it needed. Now, the central bank then entered into a special purpose audit of Puma Energy to get an understanding as to the level of foreign currency that it's needed, and that's now effectively led to this very major disagreement between the central bank and Puma Energy, and likely these allegations that the central bank will be raising with the government about the company.
Yeah. What sort of flow-on effects are we likely to see for the people of Papua New Guinea?
Well, the effects that we have been seeing, the main one that's of course concerned many in Papua New Guinea has been the grounding of flights. So in December last year, when the central bank and Puma Energy were engaged in this disagreement, Puma Energy said that it didn't have the kind of foreign currency that it needed to continue its supply, and we quickly saw that flights were grounded. We saw that Air New Guinea and PNG Air cancelled many of their flights in December. We've seen the same thing happen again just last week. So on an announcement from Puma Energy that if it wasn't receiving the foreign currency that it needed, that it wasn't receiving it, and that it would need to then ration its fuel supply, we again saw flights across the country be cancelled very quickly. So that's likely to have a very serious impact to the aviation industry if this can't be worked out or resolved anytime soon. And of course, then there's also a concern that at the Bowser, that people will be hit if the kind of fuel supply that should exist doesn't exist. And of course, many people in Papua New Guinea are very familiar with the kind of power outages that impact the country. So diesel generators are very common for people to run for their household supply. So if the fuel isn't there, of course, it's going to have widespread impact on households.
Yeah. How do you think this is all going to be resolved, Tim?
It's a good question, and ultimately that's what the government is rapidly trying to do now. It's called this 30-day state of emergency. It basically says, right, we're going to have roundtable talks to bring everyone to the table to see if we can work out a resolution through this. Now, Bank South Pacific has already agreed to extend out when it will be closing the accounts of Puma Energy till March next year. So at least that's provided some relief that the company is going to be able to continue banking in the country so there's certainly not an imminent deadline of the company not being able to bank and then for it not to be able to fill its supply, of course, of Papua New Guinea's fuel needs. But what we're expecting to happen is the government's going to go back and look at the contracts that exist with Puma Energy and effectively try and introduce more competition to the market. We've heard from the Energy and Petroleum Minister that he believes that a lot of this is coming out of the fact that there is effectively a monopoly contract with the aviation industry and because Puma is such a large supplier. So on top of the government looking at its contracts and trying to introduce competition, the government does hope that its roundtable talks will solve some of the issues between the central bank and Puma Energy.
Yeah, quite a bit to be worked out. Good to talk. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Bev.